I'm getting that yellow jaundice been going around, I know it. The heebie-jeebies.
It's hepatitis and you don't have it.
It's 12:20 a.m. on the morning of D-Day, and over England, Captain Richard Todd's Sterling bomber begins to straighten out for its run over the Channel. Todd, 24 years old, had set aside a promising acting career to join the paratroopers. Commissioned in early 1941, he was in the 7th Battalion of the 5th Brigade of the 1st Airborne Division. The colonel of the battalion, Geoffrey Pinecoffin, was in the same group of Todd. The paratroopers were on their way to reinforce the coup d'Amain party at Pegasus Bridge. Todd was supposed to fly in bomber number 36, but as his group started to climb aboard the aircraft, a senior officer stepped forward and said he was going along, and that this plane would now be number 1. Todd quietly protested, as they had their jumping plan well worked out, but he had to bow to authority. As fate has it, the aircraft renumbered 36 was shot down by flak with all the troopers lost. The first 20 or so planes had got through with the element of surprise. Many in the 30s were knocked down. At 0:40 hours, Todd's group was over the Channel. Todd was standing over a hole in the bottom of the bomber, a leg on each side. He wore a kit bag on both legs containing entrenching tools and a rubber dinghy, among other things. His Sten automatic was strapped to his chest. His pack was crammed full of grenades and extra ammunition. Todd's Batman stood beside him, trying to steady him as the Sterling took evasive from the flak. Quite a number of troopers did fall out over the Channel from the pilots taking evasive action. At 0:52, Todd landed safely on French soil. He could not get his orientation because the steeple of the Ranville Church, which was meant to be his guide, was not visible. Tracer bullets were flying across the drop zone, so he unbuckled and made for a nearby woods, where he hoped to find other members of his unit. It was at this exact moment he heard the whistle of Major John Howard, the CO of D Company, 6th British Airborne Division. D Company had the task of securing the bridges over the Orne River and Canal between the towns of Ranville and Bennyville, inland of Sword Beach in the British landing sector. Howard's main objective was to prevent German armor from cutting the landing beaches in two and halting the supply chain. On capturing the bridge, Major Howard was to blow a recognition whistle to help troopers lost in the night find their bearings. As Richard Todd moved toward the bridges, the medical officer grabbed him and asked if he could come along. He was a little startled, and it certainly didn't help when they passed a German who had had his head shot off. When they reached the bridge, there was a tremendous explosion and firework display going on. Todd assumed that the fight for the bridge was still going on, but in actual fact they had both already been secured. The noise was actually coming from a destroyed tank which one of John Howard's men, Wally Parr, had knocked out with a Piat, and the ammunition was cooking off. When the battalion finally arrived, Howard briefed them on the situation. They reached a little cafe bar at the west end of the bridge, and the CO directed Todd to set up Battalion HQ, 300 yards away below the hamlet of Lepore, whose church could be seen on the crest. Here, in the darkness, the remnants of the HQ party began furiously to dig in, his own efforts somewhat hampered by a skinned right hand, though explosive charges were used to blow foxholes. So far so good. Phase 1 of their task had been accomplished. The bridges had been captured intact, and the western bridge head had established. Now they had to hang on until sometime later that day when commandos would arrive from the beach. Minutes before first light, a shattering cacophony erupted with a glare that made full daylight seem pale as the softening up bombardment of the German coastal defenses began. For about half an hour, the din, the vibration of air and ground, the magnitude of that assault was far beyond anything Todd could have imagined. Hundreds of aircraft, American and British, rained thousands of bombs along that strip of gun positions, trenches and pillboxes that menaced the landing of our seaborne invasion force. Artillery and batteries of rocket launchers firing from special craft at sea poured a continuous hail of shells across the water, while naval guns, including the big ones of HMS Warspite, helped pulverize the defenses. From their grandstand position at La Porte, Todd felt sorry for the poor sods cowering in those German bunkers. How could they possibly emerge and fight back? But they did, and with impressive vigor, while the mighty invasion from the sea was being fought out, quite a lot, on a but no less deadly scale, was going on in the 7th Para area. There was no cessation in the Germans probing with patrols and counterattacks, some led by tanks, and the regimental aid post was overrun in the early hours. The wounded being tended there were all killed where they lay, so too was Padre Perry, who had evidently fought like a tiger to defend them. Our position had developed into a classic airborne situation. There was no front line as such, and the battalion had evolved into 4 pockets of resistance, the 3 rifle companies and the battalion headquarters group, largely out of touch with each other, but each in positions of their own choosing. From their site on the slope, they had a good view of the open ground between their position and the canal bridge, and more than once, they were able to drive off enemy infiltrating groups with enthusiastic bursts of small arms fire. Todd had primed his plastic gammon bomb and kept it handy just in case a tank might break through. There was sporadic enemy mortar and artillery fire they could do nothing about. One shell landed in a hedge near me, killing a couple of the men. He dearly wished they had recovered some of the 3-inch mortars, especially now that a handful of mortarmen had got through. A company in Bennyville, with all its officers killed or wounded, was reduced to a strength of less than 20. From time to time, the men could hear its officer commanding, Nigel Taylor, shouting encouragement. We knew that he was lying by the window of a house, one leg shattered, when his second-in-command, Jim Weber, himself shot through his chest, got through to us to report. Things might have been worse for a company, but for the action of one man, 19-year-old Private McGee. Fed up with being shot at by a tank as he ducked down in his foxhole, he leaped up and charged down the street, firing his Sten gun from the hip. The tank crew closed up the shutters and were temporarily blinded, whereupon McGee threw a plastic gammon bomb from a few yards and crippled the vehicle, which slewed across the road, blocking any further tank movement. McGee was awarded the DCM posthumously. He was killed a few hours later. B Company, in and around La Porte, repelled repeated attacks, one of the worst problems being the many snipers making movement difficult, as they picked off men from cottage windows, rooftops, and the church tower. That stout little Norman tower was right in the center of B Company's area, and very difficult to deal with. The church was surrounded by open ground, and virtually impossible to attack. Finally, Corporal Killian of the anti-tank platoon found a solution. With his Piat, a handheld bazooka, he crept from cottage to cottage until he found a position with cover from view and within his bomb's range. His first blew a tower, and succeeding ones practically shattered it. He then rushed the church, determined to finish off any snipers, but he had no need. His bombs had killed all the occupants,